Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, December 24th, and our friend Gilbert Doctorow is back with us. Welcome back,
Well, thank you, Nima. I hope I have a few Christmas presents for all the listeners.
Gilbert. Let's get started with this type of rumor that it seems that Zelensky tried to bribe Fico. What's the story behind this?
Well, your listeners of this program would certainly know that Fico's been in the news. Yesterday's papers or today's papers in the West are speaking about his 2 hour meeting with tete-a-tete with Vladimir Putin in Moscow, a meeting that was called, according to Peskov, when he was asked by Zarubin, Pavel Zarubin, the journalist who was always 2 steps behind Putin. He was asked what the when the meeting was arranged, because usually meetings with Putin are arranged way in advance. And Peskov said off the cuff, "Well, a few days ago." This was picked up by the Financial Times to suggest, well, it was arranged a few days ago, meaning that had plenty of time for preparation. It caught everyone by surprise, in fact. And he was coming precisely before the deadline expires on the pipeline that carries Russian gas across Ukraine and serves the markets in 3 Central European states, his own Slovakia, plus Hungary and Austria. That pipeline is going to be shut down on December 31st by Ukrainians as part of their war on Russia, economic side of it, and also playing into the hands of the European institutions who want to shut off Russian hydrocarbons to the EU. Well, so this was an issue of very great importance to Mr. Fico, enough for him to fly in and discuss the consequences and what could be done about it with Vladimir Putin. But preceding that, in the last week, Fico was in public exchanges of what you can call insults, trading insults, with Vladimir Zelensky. And that was about this issue, and also as part of his payback to Zelensky, he mentioned in passing that Zelensky had offered him a $500 million. Now, I got the zeros correct. $500 million bribe for he and Slovakia to change their position on Kiev's application to join NATO, and instead of opposing it, which kills it in effect because there has to be 100% unanimity on admittance of any new country, instead of opposing it, to join with everybody else and greet Ukraine as the newest member. Well, he says he declined that. Now, this may have been covered somewhere in page 20 of one of our newspapers, or maybe it wasn't covered, but it was noted by the Russian news agencies and was mentioned on air. So I take it for accurate. There's no reason for a person who's honest, who has come through as much um, threat in his public life as Mr. Fico, who narrowly survived an assassination attempt less than 6 months ago, for him to exaggerate or misstate his relations with Zelensky. Now, let's just consider what this means, because even if they barely covered it or didn't cover it, Western media, um, they should be considering what it means and what is going to come out when Mr. Musk does his house cleaning job and starts to audit the monies that have been sent to Kiev without any controls. It is the what could be going on was suggested in a kind of cartoon fashion by Donald Trump in the last week when he showed that we ship money to Kiev and it goes to this and that and finally comes back to what? Comes back to Biden's pocket. Well, that is a crude way of looking at it. But why just Biden's pocket? There are a lot of senators, including some real loudmouths, uh, who are who are demanding Russian blood and who want to fight Russia through Ukraine to the bitter end, a bitter end that they hope will be for all the parties who engage in battle. Isn't it reasonable to think that maybe they have a material interest and are receiving a few deposits to celebrate the holidays better on the side? And Americans in general, just to take the case of American exceptionalism, our commentators who don't subscribe in the alternative media, who don't subscribe to that notion in general, may be subscribing to it when they call out the Israeli lobby as having unusual exercise of power over U.S. Congress and therefore over U.S. foreign policy. I haven't heard anybody raise a peep about the possibility that American foreign policy on Ukraine is being bought with bribes coming from the funds that the U.S. and the EU have extended to Kiev. And that is something which I expect will come out when Musk goes after the money trail, to find out where it actually ended up. So there should be some interesting news in our papers in the months ahead when this activity gets going.
How do they feel in Russia right now? Recently, we've learned that Putin is talking about this is a war against Russian world. What does that mean in your opinion?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. What is he talking about?
He's talking about that the way that the West is treating Russia right now is a war against the Russian world. And it seems that he sees some sort of aggression in all dimensions.
Well, yeah, so this is a variation on a theme that he has been playing for some time now. He varies the narrative a little bit here and there, but that Russia is at war with the West, that has been part of his overarching view, as I say, expressed in one form or another since the start of the special military operation. So I don't see a great change there in that respect. What has changed in Mr. Putin's narrative in the last week or two has been this concession that he made on the 19th of December when he had this combined annual press conference and direct line communication exchange with the whole Russian nation by a special call center. And at that meeting, he said that he regretted that he didn't start moving on Ukraine earlier and that he waited too long. This is a very debatable point, but it raises something that is in the background here in U.S. alternative media, and is championed by somebody as well known and widely followed as Paul Craig Roberts. That Putin has been too mild, has turned the cheek, has been too much of a good Christian and not enough of a good statesman to do what should have been done in time, and not to allow Russia's adversaries or enemies abroad to misinterpret his restraint as a sign of weakness, which could only encourage still greater provocations and encroachments on Russian national interests. That is, I'd say that is an issue that he just barely touched upon when he said that he regretted he didn't start earlier. Nonetheless, he's doing a pretty good job of catch-up because what Russia has been saying what Mr. Putin has been saying in the last couple of weeks is really reading the riot act to the United States and the West. The stress on the power of the Oreshnik middle range hypersonic ballistic missile, that has been a large part of the change. And it makes me ask how serious he is in saying that everything should have been started earlier. There wasn't any Oreshnik 2 years ago. Russia's stepping out on the stage and acting in its own self-defense at the risk of enraging the global hegemon. That has coincided with Russia's ability to produce and to field new, decisive, strategic weapon systems. And that is all very current. As I've said in the past, the notion that all the problems could have been solved if Russia had been tough in 2014 is utter nonsense, because Russia was unprepared to withstand a US economic assault. I don't mean a military assault, that's a separate question, but an economic assault, all the sanctions from hell, Russia would have gone under in 2014 if it had had a military victory over Ukraine. It would have been a Pyrrhic victory. So going back to 2014, out of the question. Going back a little bit, maybe, but not very far. 2018 is the year when he rolled out all these systems, and rolling them out and showing them to the public because they had passed tests and were going into production. Going into production is not the same thing as having them in the field. And some of this equipment obviously takes time to produce. The Oreshnik is said to have entered serial production, and estimates coming from the States, because the Russian Ministry of Defense naturally says nothing about its production capabilities. But from the States, where I've heard estimates that 25 Oreshniks can be produced per month. That's 300 per year. Well, you don't start threatening to use the Oreshnik until you've got at least a few in your hands, because your bluff might be called. And so it is with the other weapon systems. Not all of them have been put into production. I mean, there were 6 or 7 different strategic weapon systems that Putin showed in March of 2018, when this is in the last stage of the presidential election campaign at that time. Putin had foregone participation in the televised debates, and he made his presentation to the public in the form of the large section of his speech that we call the State of the Nation speech, the annual speech that he makes to the bicameral legislature. And he rolled out these systems, and he had them shown theoretical diagrams of how they work on the screen. But that's not the same thing as having them in hand and ready to use them if need be. So I don't think he could have backed up very far to launch the special military operation. What he could have done, actually, is to have prepared the forces that were going to go and invade Kiev, Ukraine better. Because all reports that I've seen, or that I heard, just say accidentally, from a taxi driver who was a retired member of the military intelligence in Moscow, and who was complaining about what he heard from his former colleagues. This is 2 months into the special military operation, that the initial steps were disastrous because the troops weren't prepared. They didn't have all they needed. They were just rushed in. They were on military exercises, and they were moved from exercises straight into an invasion. So there, things were rather sloppy. But how much better it would have been if the preparations were were begun earlier? Well, that's a debatable, interesting question.
I think at the end of the day, we have to consider how much this conflict in Ukraine was important for the Russian military industrial complex. They have been, the army has totally changed during this conflict from a defensive army right now an army that is prepared to fight any sort of war with the West. And the way that right now the nature of the relationship between Russia and China, Russia and Iran, Russia and North Korea, they're going to sell a lot of arms to these countries. This is a huge win for the Russian industry. And how do you see in that direction? Do you think that they're going to continue with this mindset of selling? Before that, if you remember, even Turkey is part of NATO, but they're asking for weapons, that they're trying to buy weapons from Russia. And right now, it seems that Russia feels it would be much easier for Russia to sell the arms to these countries.
Well, I'm glad you put your question in the future case, because you said, will they be selling? They are not selling now, and they haven't been selling to anyone export of arms since the start of the special military operation. all of the production of the Russian military-industrial complex has gone to the Russian front. And so the immediate impact of the war on the Russian military complex was exactly the opposite of what you're saying. The Russian exports, I think they were $35 billion a year, went to zero. That this kind of fact comes up in the Financial Times as if it's a Russia can't do it. They have no. What would you do in a wartime when you're facing the whole of NATO, and this is a war of attrition, which means you better have what you need in the field the whole time, because your advantage is precisely that you have it and the adversary doesn't. So Russian sales abroad have collapsed. Well, collapsed. They simply stopped selling and they stopped fulfilling pre-existing contracts. Now, I'm not saying pulling this down from nowhere. I was listening this morning to an interview, a very important interview, which maybe we have an opportunity to discuss a little bit later in this program. An interview that Russia Today's managing director, Dmitry Kiselyov, took with the Azerbaijan Prime Minister Aliyev, and Aliyev was at one point in this. Kiselyov asked him, "Well, how do you see military purchases from Russia in going forward?" And Aliyev said just what I've explained now, that pre-existing contracts are not being fulfilled, and the Russians asked for and received from Azerbaijan permission to delay delivery. So that's the present situation. Of course, the evidence that Russian tanks are equal or superior to the best Western tanks, that Russian air defenses are superior to the best that the Americans have, whether it's Patriot or this still more advanced system that arguably they're taking to Israel and maybe also to Ukraine. Anyway, the point is that the Russian arms are demonstrated to be superior to the NATO arms against which they are sent. And that is watched closely by all of the world's procurement officers. So yes, Russian sales of arms will spiral once the war is over.
And right now, in your opinion, the way that they see in Russia, they see Donald Trump and his administration, do they really think that there has to be some sort of patience on their part until this government, this administration, the Biden administration, leaving office in Washington, leaving office, and Donald Trump takes power? How do they feel about it? Because with the drone attack on the part of Zelensky and in a on a city called Kazan, which is not of strategic importance in terms of military, I'm talking about. But they did that out of desperation, in my opinion. How do they feel about it right now?
This is discussed. What you are asking me now is discussed every day on these political talk shows, and I can tell you that the mood rocks back and forth between feeling it's utterly useless to wait for Trump because of look at whom he has appointed and what they're saying, what Kellogg is saying. Why would we wait a minute for Mr. Kellogg? Two, I'd say the latest mood seems to be, all right, let's give them a break. Let's see what Kellogg can do. Don't take it too seriously that what he has said till now is what he's going to bring to us when he comes to Moscow. So I think that they are being cautious, prudent, responding, as Putin said, going back more than a month. Russians are now reacting to the threats that they see from any given action by the Ukraine. Thought it be in line with their own exposure to these assaults from Ukraine. Now, as for this wonderfully executed 9/11 type attack on a high-rise residential building in Kazan, which was caught on video and became viral on social media. That was, let's say, very representative of the way that the Kiev regime, the military there, has been conducting the war from the beginning. It has been a big public relations and a small military kinetic warfare activity. As you say, the military value of the attack on Kazan was close to nil. Certainly, the attack on the residential building is, by all classic measures, pure terrorism. That is what terrorism is defined as, an attack on civilian targets for political leverage. So that was all uh, very indicative of weakness on the part of Ukraine, and at the very same time that their troops are being battered on the ground, both in Kursk and on the front lines of Donbass, where day by day you see significant changes in the map of the line of confrontation in the favor of the Russians, who are advancing Pokrovsk, this city which is said to be a logistics hub of great importance, is is about to fall. Further afield, to the west, the let's say the historically important towns of Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. This is in dead in the middle of the Donetsk People's Republic. They are evacuating the archives, the personal records, and so forth from the city's offices. The Ukrainians are doing that, which is a perfect indication they expect it to fall, to be besieged and to fall. What Putin has said about any ceasefire that is unacceptable to the Russians because the Ukrainians are presently reeling. They don't have the time to fall back and build defensive structures to in advance of the next wave of Russian advance. And for Russia to agree to a ceasefire would be to give them exactly that possibility to form a line that they could hold. And Russia doesn't want that to happen. It wants to take full advantage of the strength that it has in moving on, encircling the vastly weakened and demoralized Ukrainian front lines. So the Russian enthusiasm for meeting with Trump is tempered by this fact that no, they will not, under any circumstances, accept a ceasefire as an immediate measure. A ceasefire will come when there is agreement on a global settlement.
When they're talking about freezing the battlefield in order to negotiate, it doesn't make sense because when you look at the World War II, they were talking, they were negotiating while the war was continuing in those days. And right now, that could be the case. They can start negotiate, but as war continues on the battlefield, is that the case in the mind of Russians, in your opinion, right now?
There is something of a similarity with the World War II case at the very, very end. The Russians will not pause now to negotiate with whom? They do not accept the government of Zelensky to be legitimate, and so it is they only will make a halt or enter into negotiations with the United States. And that can happen only after after meetings, and preferably a summit meeting between Trump and Putin.
Yeah. Two cases, Gilbert. And if you remember in 2020, the race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden was hammering Donald Trump with JCPOA, the nuclear agreement between the United States and Russia, with Donald Trump decided to withdraw from. And he said that he's going to revive the nuclear deal and all of that, those rhetorics in those days. And right now, it seems to me that could be the same. In the mind of Russians, they're thinking, is Donald Trump going to negotiate, going to have a clear mind when it comes to Ukraine, to understand the reality of the battleground, to find some sort of permanent solution for the conflict, or he's going to be just like Joe Biden in terms of the way that he was bragging about, I'm going to revive the nuclear JCPOA between the United States and Iran, which he didn't do that. And even beyond that, he started all of these conflicts and this dangerous world that we're living in right now. How do you feel about Donald Trump?
Well, what Donald Trump has been quoting um, for the casualty rates of Russia and Ukraine is utterly absurd. Uh, his his statements about the disposition of forces uh, is just reflecting the same rubbish that the Biden administration has been getting out. Now, I'm waiting to see is what happens when Tulsi Gabbard is confirmed as they say as the most senior intelligence officer of the United States, and she becomes a daily reporter to Trump on what is going on. That she doesn't have any such position now. We don't know that she meets him at all, and certainly she isn't as a private person. Still, she has no access to intelligence. That only goes to the presidential candidate. And who's providing that information to the candidate? The same people providing the rubbish to Joe Biden. Therefore, it's not surprising that the script that we've heard coming from Trump is a very misinformed script, which does not promise much for his leading a way out of this crisis. What the Russians are taking comfort from, and the reason why they want to be cautious and to leave options open to meeting with Trump and to negotiating with him over this crisis, um, that is the um, the remarks he's made in the last week, in which he called the use of these American built um, medium uh, attack missiles, the ATACMS, the HIMARS, or with US permission, the British Storm Shadow, to penetrate deep into the Russian heartland. He has called this foolish and very dangerous. The Russians took heart because for the first time they're listening to some normal observations of risks in this war, and not to the rubbish, as I say, that Trump has obviously been handed by the security personnel of the Biden administration in his capacity as the wait-in president. So that's what gives them some hope and has tempered their remarks about Trump being a change without a difference, going back 2 or 3 weeks.
And we are witnessing Medvedev in China, Shoigu in Iran, and Belousov in Pyongyang. What's going on with the foreign policy of Russia right now? What are they trying to do with their friends?
Well, they're trying to do exactly what America is worried about. They're putting meat on the bones of this new axis that is Russia, um, Iran, North Korea, and China. The meat is being put on the bones, and I think it's forming in quite a solid way. Um, the Biden administration has only added to the problem by its continued threats against China, and uh, and Trump hasn't yet made any moves or suggested any moves that would lessen the solidarity between these four countries in opposing the American hegemony. Um, so they are traveling a lot. They're meeting with their new friends. There may be, as you and I discussed before the show, the signature on a comprehensive cooperation agreement with Iran during January, which includes a large segment on mutual defense. And, um, and the Russian military position will be that much better consolidated. As for the North Korean presence, um, our Western media speak as if they're out there fighting on the front lines in Donetsk. They're not. Any forces that have been made available by North Korea for use in Russia are being used in Russia. They're being used in the cleanup operation of the Kursk oblast or region that is part of the Russian Federation. And it's perfectly in line with the Mutual Defense Pact. It is they are not moving into the the front in Donbass.
It seems to me that the way that I have learned from the Iranian media that it's this agreement is beyond what we've seen so far. It's not just economic; it's a some sort of advanced military agreement between Iran and Russia. It seems if something big happens in terms of any sort of world war, they're going to be on the same side fighting the enemy. Do you think that right now in the European Union, and we've seen that Fitzo, Orban today said they're gonna reconsider their policy toward Russia. How do they feel the Western European countries, and I'm talking about Germany specifically, United Kingdom and France? How do they feel right now about the situation in Ukraine? Are they getting to the point that this gonna get? We know that Donald Trump, at the end of the day, he knows he has some sort of connection with the economy. He's so his main concern is the economy of the United States. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
And the policy in Ukraine wouldn't help that sort of mindset. How do they feel about it in the European Union right now?
Well, as you were pointing out, the European Union is now sharply divided. You called attention to those two states, Slovakia and Hungary, who are the vanguard of resistance to the diktats coming from Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission, telling everyone to shut up and just follow my orders in conducting proceeding in relations or absence of relations with Russia. I doubt that these two states are the only ones, and there will be more dissent made public as the political crisis in the two traditional lead countries of the European Union, Germany and France, proceeds. Germany now doesn't have a government; it's a caretaker government under Scholz because the government lost its vote of no confidence. And France is reeling from crisis to crisis with a newly installed government, and we count the days, how many days this one will last, before Macron is forced out, not by demonstrations in the streets, I don't expect that, but by the people who put him into power, the bankers. The lack of a government, the failure to take any measures to reduce the unacceptably high debt debt that's being incurred annually in the existing budget, what, 6% or more of GDP, is untenable and in complete violation of the rules of the EU. Um, these factors, and the fact that the French government paper now is trading worse than Greek, means that the finance people are going to be looking for his head. And I think they're the ones who will drive him out of office. It is impossible to consider that he will stay in office if this latest government also falls. And there's every interest in the socialists, in the Le Pen movement, to bring down this government as well, knowing what I just said, that the disturbances of financial markets will be such that he can't hold on to power.
Do they see any sort of future for their relationship with Russia, or they're not considering that right now?
I'm sure they're considering it, but they're not talking about it because it would be in strict violation of everything they've agreed to up till now. I don't think that Slovakia and Hungary are the only ones hurting from from the shutdown of this pipeline or from the curtailment of their procurements of Russian oil and in general and of the trading relationship. And the and Slovakia is not the only country, nor is Hungary. Hungary is also in this situation where the attempt from von der Leyen and her gang to include in future sanctions a ban on dealing with Rosatom and the Russian nuclear industry. That would be of enormous negative impact on the economies of these countries. And that will, if it proceeds, will lead to a, a serious breakdown in dialogue within the European institutions. Um, I have to admit, I mean, we all should be transparent, and I will be transparent now and say that I'm a cheerleader for the um, deconstruction of the European Union into something resembling what it was in 1992, a European Economic Community, because this particular structure of where the member states have voluntarily sacrificed a large part of their sovereignty to Brussels is working out very, very badly. They have the member states no longer have the competence nor the will to explore alternatives to their present foreign and military policies, which are convincingly failures. So, well, that's a discussion for another day. But the European Union is doing very badly, and I think it will be doing still worse when Mr. Musk's audit takes place and we find out which European politicians have been on a take.
And Russia has revealed the list of 9 countries to be BRICS partners on January 1st,
Mhm.
2025. When you look at this list, it's Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Thailand, and Uganda and Uzbekistan. You don't see Turkey being among these countries. What's going on with the case of Turkey in your opinion?
Well, Turkey wasn't going back to the BRICS summit. The BRICS summit in Kazan introduced the principle of a two-tier BRICS. Those that are core members for whom they have voting rights and a complete agreement is required of all of these members for any new policy to be adopted. Then there are the partners who are not in the inner core, don't have voting rights, don't determine the policies, but are eligible to profit from the infrastructures, financial and other infrastructures that BRICS creates. Turkey was named to be in that category, so we wouldn't have seen them in any case on the list for membership in beginning January 2025. Um, I think it may be early to to say that they are out completely because of their double cross on the Astana agreements relating to managing the civil war or the ended civil war in Syria and their position of support for the Idlib rebels or insurgents, what you want to call them, who brought about the removal, the replacement of the Assad regime. Um, this I have said already that Russians are not going to turn their back on Turkey because the two countries have very significant projects of great financial, economic, and value to their respective countries, and it would be harming themselves to use their difference over Syria and to break off relations. At the same time, I'd like to point out that there is room for complex agreements, for complex relations. Don't have to look for black and white. There are various grades in between. And again, listening to this interview that I mentioned earlier, that Mr. Aliyev gave to Russia Today, and which was published yesterday, it's a 1-hour interview. He was discussing the relations between his country and Turkey, which have a military, well, call it semi-alliance, going back to 1991, 92 rather, after the fall of the Soviet Union, and that they have received extensive training and upgrading of his country's, of Azerbaijan's military forces, thanks to Turkish participation, that they have 10 military exercises jointly, and that he is the only country that has close relations with a NATO member state, that's Turkey, and is also has a comprehensive cooperation with Russia. So there you have it. Azerbaijan has a close military relationship with Turkey, which is a NATO member. And it also has a very close relationship with Russia, including a purchase of a lot of military equipment from Russia. In this interview, as I've noted in an analysis of it, the language that Aliyev uses is precisely Putin's language to discuss geopolitics. He speaks about the neocolonialism of France and Western and European countries, about the need for independence, sovereignty, and so forth. This is Putin's language. And yet he still has his relationship with Turkey. So I believe that some accommodation with Turkey and BRICS will come about. Not today because of this unpleasantness over Syria, but in a year or two, yes, I think Turkey will be in the partner category.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gilbert, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always, and Merry Christmas.
And to you and to our listeners.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.